honor all of our soldiers today. Now here's our speech. My father and I have both been to Holland, but we did not go together, and our trips were very different. He was a 22-year-old man, and it was in 1945. I was a 52-year-old woman, and I traveled there in 2005 as a family member of a liberator at the invitation of a group of Dutch men who are military reenactors. My sister Sue and I, our son and daughter, John and Jenny, and Jenny's husband Andy, traveled to Zoetermeer in the Netherlands for the celebration of the 60th anniversary of the liberation of Holland. Reenactments of many events and battles were taking place that year all over Europe. And the people were saying, the old people are passing away, and we're teaching our young people about this, but this may be the last time that we do this type of thing. So we were very privileged to be able to go and attend one of those. My daddy's trip to Holland was because of World War II. From its beginnings in the late 1930s through a quick series of events in December of 1941, which included the bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7th, the December 8th declaration of war on Japan by the United States and Britain, and the December 11th German declaration of war on the United States, and then through 4 years of fighting in Europe and the Pacific, in which over 52 million military and civilian deaths occurred. The war affected countless lives in never-to-be-forgotten ways. The point of telling the story of our trip is not just about us or even about our father. We came home from that trip with a better understanding of what World War II meant on many levels to many people. And that is why we want to tell our story to you. On the morning of February 22nd, 1945, at an air base in England, briefings for a bombing mission for 31 B-24 crews began at 5:15, with all starting to launch at 9:15. My father, Hayden Lingle, was a waist gunner on a plane named the Jolly Duck that day. It was last seen about 3 o'clock that afternoon with the number 3 engine shot out. The crew was heard to report that they were low on fuel and that they were going along the Dutch coast in an effort to reach Belgium or France. But the plane crash landed in a field near the present-day town of Zoetermeer. All 9 members of the crew survived the landing. 4 of them, including my father, were taken prisoner of war. But 5 of the men evaded capture by being picked up by the Dutch underground, and they were protected. One of these men was named John McCormick, and he was a man that my daddy had trained with in Texas and had flown all 33 missions with. But he is the only man of that crew listed as having been killed in action. All the others returned to the United States when the war was over. 2 days after that plane crash, many Dutch people had gathered at the crash site to look at the plane. You can imagine that if a plane crashed around here, everybody would want to go out and see it, so that's what the people had done. A Royal Air Force plane strafed the B-24 that day to destroy it and any possible information or equipment that might fall into German hands. As a result of that strafing, many Dutch people were injured, and 4 of the people of that community were killed. There were 2 children, a little boy and a little girl, a man and a woman who was the mother of 5 children. In this country, when we talk about losing someone in the war, we usually mean a son or a husband or a brother. But in Europe, so many civilians lost their lives. People lost their little children. Children lost their mothers. And men lost their wives. So from February 22nd until April 29th, my daddy was a prisoner of war. He was marching from he was not inside a building most of that time. He was marching from one German city to another where they received a lot of abuse. It was actually a 634-mile forced march from Zoetermeer, the Netherlands, to southern Bavaria, where he finally was liberated from. And at that point in the war in 1945, everybody in Europe was starving. The Dutch people were surviving by eating tulip bulbs. Now, I had heard that before, and I thought, oh, I don't believe that. I just don't believe they'd eat tulip bulbs. But do you know that we met people in Holland who said, oh, yes. And one man said that he remembered that a real treat during the wartime years was that you got to eat a whole tulip bulb on your birthday instead of having to share it with someone. The Germans and their prisoners had very little to eat. A little broth with a slice or two of potato and a loaf of bread for 5 men to divide among themselves was all they had. Then April 29th, 1945 was an amazing day. It was the day that planes flew over Holland loaded not with bombs, but with bread for starving people. They remember it as the day that manna fell. It was the day that Allied troops liberated the survivors of Dachau, the oldest German concentration camp. It was the day that Dwight Eisenhower walked through Auschwitz-Birkenau. It was the day that my daddy was liberated. And it was the day that his friend, John McCormick, was shot and killed by the Germans. And that is how this story begins. But now, like Paul Harvey used to say, here's the rest of the story. For Memorial Day in 2004, a celebration was held at the VA hospital in Salisbury. My family and I attended that, and we saw many of the World War II veterans there. I was deeply moved by their brotherhood, their respect for each other, their patriotism. A lot of them had on their dog tags. Seeing them made me miss my daddy, and I got to wondering if anybody, anywhere, remembered serving with him and would have any memories that they could share with me about him. So I got on the internet. The email that I sent a few days later to the B24.net site received an almost immediate reply. Someone in the town of Zoetermeer, the Netherlands, was planning a World War II related event, and we were invited. Can you imagine how surprised we were at that? But we began making plans, and in early May of 2005, we found ourselves in Holland. Now Sue's going to tell you about our trip.
Your comment? Okay.
When we first arrived, we had been told that we would go to a celebration at the old church. The church was built in 1620, so it was indeed the old church. Glenda had been told that she could say a few words, so she prepared a little speech, most of it based on appreciation to them for honoring the men from the Jolly Duck and all liberators, but also in praise of our grandmother. My dad's mother prayed Psalm 91 every day that he was missing. You know that part about the angels will keep you, he will give his angels charge over you. Also, it is a protection of those who are in battle, whether it's spiritual battle or whatever. But that was my grandmother's song during this time that Daddy was missing. And so Glenda incorporated that in her speech. And before we could get to the old church for that speech, they said, you will be in a silent march. So everybody in the town came out, and we walked down the streets of that little town, and we were silent. I'm serious. Nobody coughed, nobody sneezed, nobody said a word. All you could hear were the birds in the trees when we finally got out to the Memorial Park. It was a silent march in memory of all of us. when we got there, they said, now you will see the monument to World War II there. The monument is is a brick wall about as tall as my shoulder, but it's in a semicircle. And the only words carved on that wall are 1940 to 1945, and then Joshua 4:6. So I couldn't wait to get back and look up what is Joshua 4:6. It's the Bible story about when Joshua was leading the children of Israel across the Jordan, and he told them the 12 tribes to pick up a stone, and they made a memorial, and they said, when your children look at this, and they ask you, what are these stones for? You teach them, and you tell them the mighty acts that God has done. That's how Holland, this little town of Zoetermeer, wants to remember the people involved in World War II every time they see that memorial wall. We marched silently on up to the old church. Glenda gave her speech. They had asked for it ahead of time so they could translate it into Dutch. She gave it in English, by the way. But she was crying, I was crying, the people, it was very emotional. During the day, anytime we saw the grave for John McCormick, we became emotional. We knew that was Dad's very best friend who had died on the day that Dad got liberated. Just different things made us cry. So Glenda got the name Mrs. Fountain because she cried all the time. She also was given a great big bouquet of tulips. And I do have to tell you, I was jealous because she got the tulips. But she had given the speech, and she carried those tulips with her. She said, I'm going to find something special to do with these tulips sometime on our trip. That night was indeed a time of starting to make some friends and to realize that we really were being part of something special. The next day they said, now be ready at 7:30 in the morning. We're going to be in a parade to honor World War II, and we'll have some of the equipment and jeeps and things. Well, we're from near Salisbury. Well, you know the Faith 4th of July. We go to that parade. It takes an hour, hour and a half. You know, you ride through the little town of Faith. We figured ride through the little town of Zoetermeer, and that would be it. So we got there. Well, the first thing they wanted my son and her son-in-law to dress up. These guys have all this equipment and uniforms down to the knife that you carried around the calf of your leg. Just everything perfect. World War II, vintage things that they dressed in for the reenactments. My son was so excited, he said, my mother has never let me carry a knife before. And he was only 30 years old. But they got to dress up. Glenda and I were in the Jeep, and here we started on the parade, a World War II Jeep, down, and there were 65 other vehicles. And they were not just Jeeps. They had one great big thing that you would pull a tank out when it got stuck. Just all kinds of equipment. And we were going through the town, and people were packed on the sidewalks, just lined up and waving at us and throwing kisses. And every now and then a lady would come out and give Andy or John a bouquet of lilacs, or they would kiss them on the cheek. And then we sped up and we went down what seemed to me to be like a bypass of some kind. But up on the bridges, people were waving at this parade. And we went to the next little town. And in this town, again, just packed on the sidewalks. But this time there were a lot of houses. And pushed up against those windows, because as she said, we were there when it was really cold, although it was May. They kept saying this is really unusually cold weather. But they had pushed up to the windows the senior citizens in wheelchairs, many of them, or they were standing and waving and giving us the V for Victory sign. It was like the movies that we had seen of when liberators came into a town, but this was just us in 2005, and they were still honoring the people who had liberated them. And I really found out during this trip that truly starvation and sickness, those things were taking tolls of lives of these people. It wasn't just the military or the bombs or the guns. They didn't have food. And one lady was telling us that her grandmother had told her that it was so hard to have a baby who was crying and you had nothing to give it. And I thought, well, what did she do? What do you do? Because a baby can't understand. There's just nothing to have. So the day of the parade was absolutely glorious. Little children had made things, banners and signs, and taken cardboard boxes and decorated it, and thank you, liberators. And now Britain and America were being honored very much that day. So we saw the British flag a lot, and we saw the American flag a lot. But they were thanking little kids, and I thought back to the Silent March. Those children had been taught the history of what the liberators had done for their families and their ancestors. And those little kids were just as excited as if we had been rock stars or something. They were waving and yelling, thank you, and they too were excited and enjoying that day of the big parade. Now, I told you I thought it would take maybe an hour or so. It was 7 hours. We covered all of Western Holland, I'm pretty sure. We did make several stops, and they had us a nice sack lunch, which was really in a cloth sack. Once again, sort of reenacting all kinds of things from 1945. But we had several breaks, and that was when we got to talk to the people. And they would tell us how scared they remembered being if they had grown up as a child, or how hungry they had been growing up as a child, and how thankful they were that they had been freed from the Nazi control. Now the next day, our host had told us that would be a free day for us, because they were getting ready for the final big production before we would head home. So we decided we will head to Amsterdam. We're going to go see the world in Amsterdam. Now, I'm not going to tell you much about that because most of it is sort of X-rated. I'm just going to tell you, if you're anything you want to see, you can see in Amsterdam. The final day of our trip, though, was the final big reenactment. And guess where it was held? You know, here we have Camp Barnhart for the Scouts. There they have Camp McCormick. John McCormick is honored by having Camp McCormick for the Scouts. And that's where we went for this final day. John McCormick, we found out, Dad's buddy, who would not wear a hat. When you look at his picture back here because of his beautiful curly hair, John McCormick was a little vain, I think. But anyway, he's one that got into the town of Zoetermeer and became part of the Dutch underground and the resistance. And it's because of that that he was shot and killed by the German soldiers on that particular day. They found where they were meeting. One other man was killed, a Dutch man, and then John McCormick. Those are the two that are buried at the old church where Glenda gave her speech. The only two in the whole churchyard are the two that died of the Dutch with the Dutch resistance. We also found out that when they redid this play that we got to see about that event, the people in that town still won't play the part of the German soldiers. They have to get people from outside to come in and play the part of the German soldiers. Those folks still don't want to be cast in the part of a German who comes into the hunting lodge where John McCormick and the Dutch man were killed. So as we were there at Camp McCormick, they had set up old tents like they would have had first aid, and over here they had more of that equipment, and we were just walking around, and we found out they had a display of pieces of the Jolly Duck that had been pulled out of the dikes and or out of the reservoirs where they had been able to find it. And a lady came up to Glenda. Glenda, stand up. We had these badges on to identify us as Lingle descendants. So that's Dad's picture. We had that. A lady came up to her and was trying to talk to her in Dutch and pointing to that badge. Well, Glenda was saying, I don't speak Dutch, and obviously the lady didn't speak English, but we were curious to know what she wanted to know. So in a little bit, her son came over, and he said, now, this is my mother. Are you connected to this gentleman? And come to find out, she had been a teenager on that farm when the plane slid into the pasture out in the field. She had witnessed the strafing of the plane. She and her family had taken the bodies of those that were killed into their barn until the family could come claim them. Here she was, and asking, she said, was your dad okay? And we said, well, yes, we weren't born yet. He wasn't even married yet. Yes, he got home. And then she said, we have been praying for him. Now, she didn't say we used to pray for him, And she didn't say, we prayed for him a couple of times. She used the present tense. We have been praying for him. And it just made me think, when those 4 guys got picked up not far from her farm, that she knew they were in big trouble as prisoners of war. And those folks had never forgotten that part. And as we were talking to her, she had her son ask us if we'd like to go out there. Well, of course we wanted to go, but we had not dreamed we would have that opportunity. So they made it possible for us to travel out to this farm where the Jolly Duck had made its crash landing. And it was absolutely beautiful. The greenest grass I've ever seen, the bluest sky that day. It was so beautiful. And as we stood there, once again, we were just overcome with emotion, thinking how 5 guys, how quickly they had to divide up and decide who's going which way. And the 5 that headed one way got into the town, and the 4 that headed the other way headed right into the hands of the Germans. And we stood there kind of looking at that road and thinking about our dad heading down that road. And then the lady led us over to where in 10 years before that, now remember we were there in 2005 for the 60th anniversary. On the 50th anniversary, they had erected a little memorial there and had the names listed of that crew and what they were, you know, on that particular mission. So we found our dad's name and the names of the crew. And it's a little garden there, just some white rocks and this memorial. And that's when Glenda realized what she was supposed to do with the tulips that she had been carrying all the time. And she put the tulips down at the base of that little memorial, and she had tied a scarf similar to the one she has on now, that she tied that around those tulips, and we were able to leave something there at that memorial site. As we got ready to go, and as I've mentioned several times, it had been rainy and cold. But on that day, as we were getting back in those cars to return to Camp McCormick, as we walked down, there was the most beautiful rainbow that came and just sat over that farm. And we have a picture of that, if you have time to stop by on the way out. Also on the table, we have a picture of our dad, which we call the official prisoner of war picture. After they were captured, it was a habit of the Red Cross to make sure that they got a picture and a postcard to the family. Now the postcard was standard. You didn't get to write your own message. It just said, I have been captured, I am being treated well. Do not try to write to me now. I don't have an address. I will write to you later. Well, they never got to write anymore. And so that little standardized postcard form is over there. But then they took the men into a room where there were a lot of different size clothes. I don't know if they came from the Jewish people they had captured. I don't know. It was a mixed matched sets of clothes. You were to get a shirt and a tie and a jacket. Get that on and have your official send home to the Red Cross picture made to show how well you were doing and being treated. And then those clothes were taken back off and you put back on your uniform. And I just want to remind everybody that when they were on that forced march, there was no such thing as stopping to take a break or a rest stop. There were no regular bathroom breaks of any kind. Most of the guys, our dad being one, had dysentery, and you had to keep marching or it was just as easy for them to take you over here and shoot you. So this is what is meant by a forced march. You either march or then that's it. We are so thankful our dad did make it home. We're glad that our grandmother prayed for him and that the church prayed for him and that the family prayed that he got to come home and marry his love, Lingle Herlocker, Bob's cousin, that he got to come home and then have the family that he wanted. I do want to say that if there was anybody though that had PTSD, it would have been our dad. He had terrible nightmares. He never wanted to talk about the war unless he could tell you how much he won playing poker. Or if he wanted to tell you that he always had a lot of girlfriends. Other than that, we didn't find out anything. So we are thankful we had this opportunity to go and to learn. And Glenda has about one more thing. Thank you so much for your kind attention. We tag team on this thing. That's the
been a good way for us to do this. Do y'all really believe that? There are some things that happened on that trip that it's really hard for me to believe, just hearing her tell about it. The thing about the woman coming up to me, finding the Dutch woman who had been at the farm the day that the plane went down, who took us out there, the rainbow that appeared in the sky. A lot of this stuff, you know, you think, are they making that up? But I promise you it happened. During our time in Holland, we were in a lot of wind and cold rain and mud. It was physically exhausting, and we were just plain wet and cold about the whole time. At one point, I realized that my daddy had spent February, March, and April of 1945 outdoors in this place without a bed, without a bathroom, or sufficient food to eat. That kept me from complaining about how cold I was, and it did make me cry. I cried a lot, and they did call me Mrs. Fountain. They said, "You have so much water." A story that had began so many years before ended with smiles and tears, embraces and kisses. When we left, we promised the men in Holland that we would come back to the United States and tell the story of what we had seen and of what they have done and are still doing in Europe to remember and honor their liberators. In the years since World War II, much has changed in the world. Have y'all noticed that? Things have changed. 2018 brings unique challenges to all of us, and they get more and more challenging, I think, every day. The United States has fought other wars that did not bring the victories and triumphs of World War II. Veterans of other wars have not been welcomed home with the same celebration, and patriotism seems to have faded in our country. The world we live in is not the world that the men who fought World War II envisioned for the coming generations. But that does not change this fact. A great victory was won in World War II. The forces of tyranny and aggression in Europe were crushed, and the way was reopened on our planet for the onward march of progress and civilization. The valiant men of the Allied nations who gave their lives in defense of freedom should be honored and remembered. The record of their victories and the memory of their valor should never die. There is much that has not been told or shared or asked about because it would take us about 4 days. We were there 4 days, and it would take a long time to tell you all the amazing things that happened. But if there's one thing that I want you to learn from what we share with you today, it is to honor our veterans, and I'm so proud that this group has done exactly that. This has been so wonderful. Those of our friend and family, those in our community who served in the military, thank them for what they did for our country and for the world. Ask them questions about where they served and what they did, because it matters to us. Each one is a hero. Each story is unique. The stories are important, and they should be shared and remembered. We should honor the special patriotic days of remembrance that our country celebrates and teach our children and grandchildren what they mean. The people in Europe are doing that. They're making sure that their children and their grandchildren know what happened, and we need to do that same thing. These are not simply days to be off work or out of school. They are not just parade days or picnic days. Our patriotic holidays are days of national pride, allegiance, and remembrance that we are America, land that I love. One nation under God, beautiful and good and strong, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Who has asked me to model one thing? I don't know if any of you have ever heard of a place called Cannon Mills. But this is the towel that they put out in 1943. Now, that's before the war was won. But it says USA, in God we trust, and then down at the bottom, it's got an ugly word. Can you read that? It says something about Hitler down there at the bottom. And I want to show you how this was designed. When you take a bath and you're going to dry off, look what happens.
And Gail Lingle taught her how to